Welcome to our second test review. In today's lecture, we're going to be covering some key issues that will be on the examinations for undergraduates and potentially graduate students. The first thing on the exam is make sure you know the types of inventory models and where they're applicable. We talked about it last time. I'll go through another slide. Also, make sure to cover the papers. There'll be questions on the papers. Know what the plot of the inventory looks like as a function of time operating under the different systems, EOQ, QR, big S, little s, news vendor, etc. P policy. So those are some basic things that you should try to get done for the exam. Undergraduates, a lot of your exam is multiple choice. You guys have taken multiple choice questions. But the other half is essay. So don't be short on your answers. Give a complete answer to the question, especially if it's computational. Because what I do is I read through all of them, I grade them, and I award partial credit. Okay? So if it's an essay question, you can get partial credit. If it's a multiple choice question, well, there is no partial credit. So let's start today's lecture. I'll put this slide up one last time, because it's important. Make sure to know the assumptions and when to use a particular policy based on the assumptions, right? And for the first test, we've only covered the stuff in gray. The other stuff is the second test. And a fundamental assumption of all of these models is that your demand's static. It may be deterministic, it may be random, but it's not like 30 this month and 60 next month. Okay? It'd be the same distribution, right? It'd be a distribution from 30 to 60 would be fine, because that would get you a P policy without setups or a big S little s policy with setups, correct? So go through that. We've gone through that several times in the slide. Make sure to know what inventory system is reasonable. So you're doing automotive assembly. Which one of these is the closest? What inventory system most closely matches an automotive assembly line? Somebody guess. EOQ. Well, what's the first thing we know about an automotive assembly line? What's the demand? Fairly constant, right? Because it's producing a car every minute, or whatever rate it's running at. You could also answer QR if you wanted, right? Because then you would assume that there was what? Randomness in the lead times. If you're getting a part from a domestic supplier, EOQ with some safety stock's probably good, but that's basically what QR is EOQ with some safety stock when you get down to it. A little bit different, but not much. You're in a retail environment with nightly deliveries. What problem does that look like? The truck comes every night, delivers the stuff regardless of whether you order an item. News vendor, right? Because you have random demand during the day, it's periodic, and what you're trading off is the holding cost versus the stock out cost, because you can assume no setup. Because it costs basically nothing to toss an extra whatever on the truck, pallet or box. You're in a retail environment with sporadic deliveries. Maybe that's QR, right? Because you have random demand, but you're in setups for delivering maybe, some cost. Spare parts under continuous review with significant lead time. There's only one that's the correct answer.
Used.
EOQ. Did I hear EOQ? What would be wrong with EOQ? Spare parts means what? The demand's going to be deterministic or random? Random. Long lead time. So what model has random demand and long lead time and continuous review? It'd be the QR, right? Because that takes into account the random demand. Now, if you did spare parts with periodic review, it'd be big S, little s. Be prepared to to compute total landed cost and transportation costs to select the best supplier, given piece price and other factors. And in order to do this, you got to be able to compute cube, okay? And so we have a truck that is 52 feet long by 102 inches wide by 110 inches tall. Or 53 feet, sorry. So this is 102 inches. And let me open up Excel so I don't mess this up too badly. 53 feet is, multiply that by 12, 600 inches long, 636, okay? And then it's 110 high. How many boxes can I put in there? Well, the boxes themselves are standard dimensions, 48 by 48 by 40, okay? Well, the height on the pallet's never standard. It's just the base of the pallet standard. So we have a pallet that's 48 by 48. So how many pallets can I put on this truck? Well, I would take 102 divided by 48, and I would round down. Sorry, round down. And that equals 2, correct? You can put 2 this way, right? Because 48 plus 48 is, what's 48 plus 48? 96. And you have some clearance, right? How many can you put lengthwise? Well, that wide, long. Take the floor of that number. 18?
13.
13? Let me...
Not a calculator, though, so.
I will do it with a calculator, just because I'm bad at math. 13.25 or 13. Okay? So how many can you put on a layer?
26.
26 per layer. And how many layers can you put on this truck? Remember, the pallet's 40 high. 2. So times 2 layers. Or how many per truck?
52.
52 per truck. Just make sure to be able to do that calculation. Okay? Very important calculation, because a lot of times the question is, what pallet do I want to use? And for instance, in an ocean container, you can't fit two 48s next to each other, I don't think. You can fit a 42 and a 4 by 48. And we'll get to that in a second. So it's very important to keep that in mind. There's tremendous cost savings sometimes in packaging if you really mess it up, right? So let's say you stack it maybe incorrectly, so it's 66 inches tall. You stack like 5 layers on a pallet, it's 66, and you can't stack 2 pallets on top of each other. Stack 1 less layer, and then you can put 2 pallets on each other. Okay? Very simple stuff, correct? This is kindergarten math, correct, for everybody? But the challenge is when you get a bunch of this stuff, and you have to build a lot of trucks, and then you sometimes need sophisticated algorithms like MaxLoad being one of the vendors that make such algorithms that really try to optimize this problem. What's the best distribution I can get? And this gets a lot more complicated when you're talking about air, because not all the cargo boxes are the same on an airplane. Because those that are on the outside are shaped like the airplane, like that, because that's just the curvature of the airplane, right? So you have to load some of those. Some of them are square, and there are some very odd-shaped things when you're talking about loading an airplane. And Maybe you have 2, and those boxes all need to be filled with your cargo. And the question is, which box type do you buy? How many of them? Same with ocean. So, be prepared for a simple cube calculation, undergraduates. So know your graphs, EOQ, QR, little s, big S, and P policy. You know, the big difference between EOQ and QR is what? The demand, and what does that look like on a graph? EOQ is a bunch of straight lines, right? QR goes down, could go below 0. I mean, it always goes down, but it goes down in kind of a wiggle fashion, not a straight line. So, an example of cube calculation. Let's say I want to put a standard 42 by 48 by 40 pallet on a 40D ocean container, and each pallet weighs 300 pounds. Well, I go to my carrier's website and I can find the dimensions of the container, and I can load it. And what you can do is the thing's 93 inches wide, right? So I can put one of the 48s lengthwise and then one of the 42s lengthwise. Because 42 and 48 is 42 plus 48, 90, right? I can put two 42s lengthwise, right? But that's going to reduce the total number by 2, usually. And so the first row, where it's 42 wide and 48 long, I can have a total of 9 containers. The second row, I can have 11 containers. So the total number of containers I can put on a level is 20. And with this part being however tall it was, you could put 2 high. So you could put 40 containers, pallets per container. Last statement's important. Check the weight. The problem is, if I get a heavy item, it doesn't matter how many containers I can put space-wise, right? Because you'll hit road restriction. For instance, the funniest thing to see is an ocean container full of batteries. It's 2 high stacked batteries on the floor with air, and that's a 20D. Why? What do batteries weigh? Car battery. How much does it? Have any of you picked up a car battery? It weighs a ton for its size, right? You know, small little box, and you're going, ugh.
Avoiding it, it's all.
At least they're heavy for me. I wouldn't want to move them around all day, right? They're probably, what, 45 pounds for that little box, something around the 30? It's heavy. So, that, you know, just make sure to be able to do a basic cube calculation related to inventory. So, the paper, the Procter Gamble paper, I'm going to briefly go through and point out some key things. 90% of their business units use the inventory tool, $70 billion in total revenue. Most use a single-stage tool, but some have rolled out a multi-stage tool. $1.5 billion in cost savings. The single stage, they basically constructed an Excel inventory model, and it was widely used at P&G. The inventory model is based on setting safety stock, which is different than the models in the book, right? You know, P&G's whole model is basically, how do we set the safety stock so that we can enter it into the ERP system? And their metric is fill rate. Let's try to fill 95% of our customers' orders and set our safety stock to those levels. So we're talking 95% fill rate, 7 to 8 days, weeks lead time, production time 1 to 2 days, periodic review, transportation times, actual shipments is 13 to they have forecast for 13 weeks. What does the model try to do? Well, it tries to set the safety stock, order accordingly, and so on. Read through the paper. Safety stock in their model is they're keeping track of days on hand, right? So looking forward, how many days on hand of inventory do I need? And the safety stocks are fed back into SAP, and SAP does the MRP explosion that we'll talk about after the test. And the goal is to target this fill rate. So they're asking, how much additional inventory do I need in order to provide 95% fill rate? They ran an optimization to reduce finished goods, and when they ran the optimization, what they found is they needed to increase WIP levels. Okay? What was the first thing I said the first day of lecture? Where's inventory most expensive to hold? As work in process, because it interferes with things in the facility. Reason why Procter Gamble can get away with holding inventory as work in process is, what does Procter Gamble make?
Toothpaste.
Toothpaste and consumer products. They make more than toothpaste, but their typical product is toothpaste. And let's pretend this is toothpaste. How many base stocks are there for toothpaste? There's probably only one base stock, right? So this is stock. It's the raw toothpaste, whatever goes into Crest, right? And then you add what? Flavor. You add color and flavor, taste. Okay? So we've stock, color, flavor, taste. And then you put it in a tube, right? So you have size. And then you put that tube in a package. So you're only going to have one of these probably, right? And then you may have 10 different colors and taste. And then each one of those is going to have maybe 4 sizes, right? So because you have the travel size, you have the normal size, you have the economy size, and then you have the one you saw at Sam's Club. And then packaging. You're going to have promotional packaging. Maybe you put a Spider-Man logo on it. Maybe you put, put them 3 together and sell them at Walmart. Maybe 2 together at this store. So you may have 4 packaging options. So if I store inventory here, I have to store inventory for 160 products. Whereas if I store it as work in process, I only have to store it for 1. And as a general rule of thumb, whenever you pool inventory, you need less of it because it can all be used for all different tasks. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's what the people at Procter & Gamble came up with. Let's pull it back to a non-differentiated state, store more there, and less in finished goods. And if one of those finished goods inventories gets critically low, we can route it from a higher level of the echelon. Okay? These are the sort of problems that supply chain management deals with every day. And they're big issues, right? What was the first slide I said? How much did this model manage? 90% of $70 billion. So about $61 million, right? Billion, gosh, per year. How much did it save? 1.5 billion. So you don't have to do much improvement, right? Because that's only a couple of pennies, right, on the dollar. Because you got 66 billion, save 2%, 1.5 billion. That's a big number. And so, be cognizant of that going forward. Supply chain can be a great career, especially if you're playing with $66 billion. You can look really good. That's another important consideration for all of you when you look at projects. You got to initially, and this is more for OR, and I stress this in OR. When I'm starting a project in OR or something that involves a lot of effort, right? Designing a software system, etc., to implement it, you got to ask yourself, how much am I really going to save? So let's say it was a company that did $500 million worth of sales, and you save 1% or 2%. You're talking, $10 million. So you can, the most I'd want to spend on the project in terms of IT and support would be $4 or $5 million. If you're talking a company with $20 million worth of sales, how much can you spend on the project? Well, if you save 1%, you're talking $200,000. You can't do much IT work for $200,000. Talking Procter Gamble, yeah, you can spend some money, obviously, have a big OR group. So you always have to remember, what's this project really going to save? And then select your tools accordingly. Other funny thing about this paper, Procter & Gamble's a massive company. Everybody knows that, right? What software did they use on the initial prototype that was used throughout the company?
Spreadsheets.
Excel, yeah. So I'm making decisions for a top, probably 50 company in the world. I mean, just a massive firm using Excel. Not a good IT approach, but you prove the concept with Excel. Maybe they give you a few additional dollars to write a real system. I love Excel, but I've seen more people make mistakes with Excel. And one of the people in class who's been in the work environment was nodding their head. Excel is error prone. Why do people use it?
It's cheap, convenient.
It's cheap, it's easy to use, and you don't have to ask permission. Because you don't have to go to IT and say, build this for me, right? And then IT will hem and haw, and they may or may not do it.
It's easy to ramp up.
It's easy to ramp up. Most people have used it before. So your user, Excel spreadsheet, I can do this. There's not a fear factor, right?
But if you have more than one person using it, you're screwed.
That's putting it nicely, succinctly. Yeah. So, supply chain management is all about complex relationships, okay? And we have issues. The key drivers is, what is the market demand? How do we get market share? What's the demand for our product? How much inventory should we store? What inventory policy, lead time, price, profit? And what we have to consider in supply chain management is our design, our capacity planning. And design is a supply chain question because of part proliferation, right? We want to design a custom part for everybody. Guess what? That's going to have significant supply chain management costs because we'll have to store more inventory, and it'll be just harder to manage. We have to know, how much capacity do we want? Do we want to be the vendor who runs at 100% capacity, or do we want to be the guy at 75%? It's a strategic decision, and there's the answers are very different depending on what choice you make. If you're at 75, you can always react quickly to your customer. If you're at 100%, you're stuck. Make versus buy, organizational structure, procurement, quality. We've talked about all those. 10 quick questions to prepare you for the test. What's the basic difference between XML and EDI?
XML is web-based.
XML's web-based. That's an okay answer. But what's the fundamental thing with EDI? What makes EDI hard?
Something that going to a system.
Yeah, but the EDI message is fixed format, right? Everything has to be in the right place. XML is tag-based. It's free format. That's the big, big difference. EDI is real strict rules. Oh, this is an easy one. What's RFID? Radio frequency identification. And what does it mean? What does it buy you?
Tracking.
Tracking in the sense you can read a barcode at a distance, right? What are the tasks of a procurement department? That's a hard question. What are the tasks of a procurement department?
Depends on the company.
What?
It depends on the company.
It all depends on the company. Yeah. Procurement department's basically responsible for purchasing items, okay? And so they take the requirements and then typically they find the suppliers, they contact the suppliers, they run auctions, bidding rounds, procedures. They determine who they think is the best supplier and then get approval from the various stakeholders. What is purchase price variance? The difference between the cost this year and last year times the volume, right? Why is that a bad metric? Is it the purchasing department's fault if the price of an item went up? Probably not. They can do it. They can make mistakes enough to cause that, but at the end of the day, prices, if you do things correctly, are set by who? The market, right? Why is total landed cost or total cost of ownership important in globalization? Well, the reason is, if your supplier's far away, there's hidden cost to that, right? You have to store inventory, you have additional transportation cost, and you have to have a good grasp of what that additional supply chain cost for inventory and transportation is going to be. What's the common tariff for an LTL carrier? What do you have to know to get an LTL tariff to run? Origin zip, destination zip, what else? The tariff itself, the freight class, the weight, and the discount and the percent discount, right? LTL tariffs are based on what?
Less than truckload?
Less than truckload, right? They're based on a tariff structure. And so they're all weight-based tariffs. But you can't just enter a weight, right? Because then the carrier won't know what you're shipping. So what do you also have to have? Freight class to convert the weight into a price, right? Because shipping steel parts is very cheaper than shipping bubble wrap. 100 pounds of bubble wrap, a lot harder to ship than 100 pounds of steel parts on a pallet. Parts on a pallet are harder to ship than parts off a pallet. And so the freight class determines how hard it is to ship. The weight and the freight class determine the price if you give it the origin and destination zip. And then you're done. Plus a discount off the standard tariff, which is usually substantial in a minimum charge if you want to be precise. Air tariffs are typically based on what? The dimensional weight, which is the maximum of the actual weight or the weight in where you take a cubic meter and convert it into a weight. Ocean containers are typically private. They're just contract-based per container. The ocean carrier doesn't typically care what you put in the container, as long as it's not too dangerous or illegal or something like that. LCL is very similar to air. The most common... No, that's not actually right. The most common ocean container is... Oh, that's a question. What is the most common ocean container? 20D, 40D, 40H, or 53D?
40.
40D. Right. And we talked about that in class, right? 20D can go anywhere in the world. When would you use a 20D? When you're shipping something very heavy, right? You're weighing out the container. You don't need all the space. 40 high cube, you'd ship where you need an additional height in the container. It's specialty equipment. They'll charge you a few extra dollars for it. 53D, you can only ship between the United States and China. It's the only place in the world that I know of where that equipment type is commonly used. There may be others. Why? What would happen if you tried to ship that to, let's say, Europe? What are you going to run into?
They may not have the equipment to offload it.
They may not be able to offload it, but what's the next step? You get it off the boat. What happens now?
Customs.
It gets through customs. Now what happens?
Get it on a truck.
You get it on a truck. And guess what? 53 feet in Europe is not a legal size for a truck. It's too long. Okay? So the question, there's a lot of little knowledge that goes into international shipping. What's legal where? How much weight can you put in it based on the road restrictions, etc. that's what makes transportation fun. So let's look at this total landed cost question. You order a part from the supplier. You pay transportation costs. The pallet's 48 by 42. The dimension of the part is 8 by 6 by 20. The part can be packed too high on a pallet. Pallets can be stacked. Do not change the orientation of the primary package. That just means you can't put the part some weird way on the pallet. Pallet is 6 inches high. The demand is 2,000 parts per year. The total cost of the part is $10. The holding cost is 30% of the value of the part. Setup cost is $25. Compute the EOQ, and we come up with an order quantity of 2,886 parts per order. Look at our transportation options. We can do full truckload for $1,000 or LTL for $50 a pallet. Okay? And so what I wanted you to do was compute the optimal order quantity. And what are the logical things you could do? Well, you could do the EOQ, right? You could do a full truck, or you could do an LTL, one pallet at a time, or EOQ for LTL, or full truck, or EOQ, okay? But early on in the class, what did we say about inventory and EOQ for changes in quantity? If I double the quantity, does it increase total cost that much? Not really, right? Inventory costs are usually fairly small to piece price costs, and for this part, they may be small to transportation. So what we can do is we can compute how many parts fit on the full truck, and we find that 5,040 parts fit on the full truck. So if we go full truck, we're going to order 5,040 parts at a time. We can compute the holding and setup cost, right? And then we get $2,400 a year for setup, $7,000 for holding, $7,500, and we're shipping 92 trucks per year of this stuff, so $92,000 for transportation, about $100,000 for transportation, okay? So in this problem, guess what? Transportation dominates inventory and setup. We try to do LTL at the EOQ, and we find the cost is 3 times higher because we're paying for transportation. Does that make sense? So we ran the EOQ, and what did the EOQ say ship a day? Or ship, what quantity did it say to ship in? Half a truck. We bump it up to a full truck, and our cost decreased. Now, we can set up a different problem where it might be best to run it at half a truck, or a quarter of a truck, or a third of a truck, or LTL. But you got to understand that there's a relationship between transportation and inventory. Transportation wants what? Shipping in quantity, full trucks, full pallets, etc. What does inventory want? Small shipments. And so you just got to work out the numbers, right? Clearly, for this part, the transportation savings from FTL dominates inventory and holding cost, and so it's best to ship it on the truck. That was a hard problem. There won't be one similar to that, at least for the undergraduates. One last point, and I think I make this twice during the semester, but it's an important point. What you want to do on all these things is make a business case. Clearly identify the problem, and no need to copy this down. This is not going to be on the test. Document the problem with data. Understand your design constraints, software, labor rules, capital restrictions. Present the solution. Make a recommendation. Get everybody's agreement that changing inventory levels or changing transportation modes is a good idea. And then implement. When you make a business case, you want to identify all stakeholders earlier. You want to be able to look for anybody who's directly impacted by the change. So if I'm talking about, let's say, changing from LTL to truckload, who's somebody that might be affected? Well, the warehouse staff, right? Do we physically have the space to keep the additional inventory? You want to also identify interested parties who are not directly affected. Key in career in general, especially in supply chain management, is you got to get used to talking to multiple levels of the organization. You have to talk to the shop floor, you have to talk to management, you have to be equally comfortable talking to everybody because they all may have important information if you're doing a major design change, right? Let's say I don't like the way this part's loaded on the pallet because it messes up transportation. Well, it may make unpacking it easier, or it may make it safer to move that way, right? So you've got to talk to multiple people, clearly communicate your goals, be data-driven, and come up with a business case. One important thing on a business case, if you're talking a major project like that Procter Gamble one, if I'm looking at a major policy change that has significant impact, I might want to look for incremental change. For instance, if I want to reduce my lead time by adding inventory, which we'll talk about later, maybe I really want $10 million of capital and 6,000 square feet of warehouse space to cut lead time down from 60 days to 20 days, okay? But is there a lesser policy, maybe $4 million worth of capital and 3,000 feet of warehouse space that would get me the significant benefit that I could implement beforehand? And so I do a partial, get good results, then I can do a full. Does everybody get that? You want to be fairly conservative in your changes. So if we currently are moving daily LTLs, and maybe we could switch to a full truckload once a week or every other day. And this might save $20,000 in transportation at the price of $4,000 of increased inventory. Well, we're going to need the approvals for space for the extra inventory from a whole bunch of people, right? And we're going to need to review this with people, make sure the math's okay, get it signed off on, get it executed. Now, I've posted the job posting, and you do this after the test, for the technical interviews. And the interviews will be graded based on your PIC responses. You can either do it in writing, or you can schedule a brief call with me if you would prefer. If you're going to do the brief call, learn about the companies, try to prepare like a real interview. It's optional, but it's a good idea. You might as well pretend that you're going to a real interview. Select one of the jobs. Mock interviews will be scheduled after the test, after the production planning lectures. So it'll be several weeks, but that's one of the assignments in the course. I don't know how this slide got in a test review because it has nothing to do with the test. But another important thing that's supposed to be a takeaway from this course is lifelong learning, okay? And you're going to be doing tremendous amounts of job-based learning. When you talk about knowing how to ship stuff, that's all job-based learning, okay? Or purchase something. That's going to be job-based learning. I'm trying to provide a baseline in this course, but most of what I'm talking about in here deals with auto industry transportation and auto industry purchasing. If you're in another industry, let's say you're in the chemical industry, very different on both parts, okay? Because chemical, for transportation, you're going to have barge and rail are going to be your primary modes. And we talked very little about barge. Also on purchasing, chemical has incredibly complex purchase and sale relationships. Okay? Why? Why would chemicals purchasing be complex?
Well, the prices are changing constantly.
Prices are changing constantly, and that's a big part of it. And the other big reason is what?
Product is dangerous.
Product? What? Product? Well, there is no such thing as a waste stream in the chemical industry. Guess what? My waste is what? Somebody else's feedstock. I mean, there is eventually waste, and that has to be destroyed, but it's a very, very small part of the whole value chain, okay? So in chemical, you negotiate complex contracts between facilities, such as, you promised me so much of this chemical per day via pipeline, right? And I agree to accept so much of it per day by a pipeline, and I'll pay you if I go over or under. Why? Because my reaction's producing some stuff that I don't need, and you need it. And so we come to some sort of agreement. Very unusual. Discrete parts don't work that way, right? Usually you don't have this, I have to make it, and my buyer has to buy it. Next thing is attend conferences, self-study. I can't stress the importance of this enough. Make sure you're an expert in your field, books, online material. Formal training is a good idea. Many very good part-time master's and MBA programs exist. IEs can do either MBA, IE, even a few have done ME graduate school. Most companies will pay full cost for going to school part-time if you're an employee. But I'd wait 2 years after joining the company just so that you get yourself in a good situation career-wise before starting such an undertaking. Lifelong learning can be broken up into technical skills, such as designing and installing a heat exchanger or configuring SAP, or SQL, statistics, reporting packages, as well as the important soft skills. Can you write, manage, sell things, do project management? And how do you document skills on a resume? And it can be difficult without work experience. The technical skills are easy to document. Some of the softer skills are harder. So that was kind of a waste of you guys' time preparing for the test. But the concept of lifelong learning is very critical and one of the outcomes of this course, okay? How are we going to get to that point? Well, you guys are reading journal articles, right? You're doing the SAP assignment mostly on your own. I'll post a video, but that's mostly your work, okay? And you are preparing for that interview. And those are all the sort of things that going forward you'll have to do. Because you get to a new company, what's the first thing you have to do? Learn their system, be it SAP or something else, right? So any questions for me about the exam before we conclude?
It's open book openness, right?
Yes, for the graduate students. I guess for the undergraduates as well. Can't really police it very well. Any other questions? And one final thing. Undergraduates, please do not... First of all, the exam's large Q bank. Secondly, if you help somebody else out, you're just lowering your grade because it's curved. Don't think about cheating. I've never had an undergraduate cheat in one of my courses. Don't be the first one I catch. It's a lot of work on my part, a lot of work on your part, okay? And, professors are surprisingly smart when they see the same answer twice, especially the same wrong answer. Okay? I don't think any of you would do that, but don't put us through the work. I don't have the time. You don't have the time. It's not worth it, okay? Good night, all.